I woke to the taste of pennies and sunshine, metal and sweet, wrong in the same breath. The ceiling fan hummed its lazy loop above me, stirring warm air that smelled faintly of bleach and orange cleaner, the late-night perfume of a house that wanted to pass inspection. My tongue felt thick, my fingers slow, as if a hand I couldn't see had slipped a soft weight over my body and pressed. "Babe?" Ethan's voice came from the doorway, a careful murmur, like a nurse with a chart. "You okay?" His silhouette was all angles against the hall light. Tall, neat, one hand braced on the frame. On the nightstand, the glass of water he'd left for me an hour ago sweated quietly onto a coaster, the ring of moisture spreading like a halo losing patience. I swallowed, and the wrong taste deepened. "I don't feel right," I said. The words sounded like they came from under a pillow. He crossed the room in 2 strides, the citrus cleaner riding his skin like a second shirt. He pressed the back of his hand to my forehead, then tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, a gesture he always performed with a kind of stage-ready tenderness. "You ran hot earlier," he said. "I brought you water. You were restless. Bad dreams again?" Bad dreams. I blinked and the room wobbled. Through the half-open window, I heard a train drag its horn across the east side and a siren stutter toward I-35, distant and inevitable. Ethan lifted the glass and tipped it toward my mouth. I turned my head away, slow and deliberate. The motion made my stomach lurch like I'd stepped off a curb I hadn't seen. "What's wrong?" he asked, all concern. His breath was mint, always meant. "I don't know." It came out thinner than I wanted. He sighed like a man trying his best. "It's okay, we'll call the nurse line." He reached for my phone on the dresser, already in problem-solving mode, already narrating the version of the story where he rescued me. I stared at the glass. A small bubble clung to the inside near the bottom, refusing to rise. The house creaked like an old friend changing the subject, and inside my own body, some small, hard certainty stood up and said, "You are not safe." Why did everyone trust a man who looked like an answer?
My name is Claire. I'm 32, a copy editor at a small publishing house that makes beautiful books no one buys in bulk. My job is to keep commas out of the wrong beds and make sure architects get their credits spelled correctly in glossy coffee table spreads about buildings that are better at being photographed than inhabited. I like tidy margins and sentences that land like small truths. I like finding the one typo hiding in a paragraph like a secret you can fix. I met Ethan at a launch party for a cookbook we published, Regional Pies, the kind of book that wants you to believe flour is a form of forgiveness. He stood by the folding table like he owned the concept of protein, clean cut in a white button-down with the sleeves rolled to the honest part of his forearms. He laughed with the publicist, and somehow his laugh included the people not currently talking to him. When he asked what I did, I said, "I rescue commas." And he said, "I rescue people." Then told me he was a wellness coordinator for a corporate gym downtown. It sounded like a job invented by optimism and liability waivers. He said it like he'd been called to it. I was 8 months out of losing my dad, and grief had made me weirdly susceptible to competence. Ethan texted me the next morning, "Coffee? I promise to let you keep all your commas." And I said yes because I was tired of talking to myself about talking to someone. He showed up with a smile like a billboard and an iced Americano for me, even though I hadn't told him my order. "You look like Americano," he said, which should have been nothing, but sounded like a trick I wanted to believe in. We moved fast. He cooked like a person who had grown up reading labels for sport. Everything measured, everything bright, everything named. He loved routines and loved me loving his routines. He bought me running shoes and took me to Lady Bird Lake at sunrise when the city smells like wet cedar and hot concrete cooling. He ran, and I jogged, and he said, "Breathe like this," and I did. After the 3rd date, he brought me a bouquet of something that looked like little white fireworks and said, "Safe for cats, don't worry." He'd already learned my cat's name, Scout, and spoke it like we shared custody of a someday. My friends liked him because my friends are kind, and because Ethan is the sort of man who makes kindness feel efficient. He wrote my mother a thank you note after meeting her for brunch, which is the kind of gesture that mothers use the word intention in sentences about men. He wiped the kitchen counters until they squeaked. He stacked my dishwasher like a person auditioning for a contest called alignment. 4 months in, we combined apartments into a white brick duplex on a quiet street off Manor Road, a place with a mature oak shading the front walk and a porch that promised iced tea and a breeze that would never arrive. The house had a gentle, old house smell, plaster and faint dust, the kind that hints at family photos you haven't hung yet. Ethan brought his blender and his labeled bins and the kind of enthusiasm that makes paint dry faster. I brought books and a sofa that had already listened to me cry. At first, his care felt like relief. He packed me snack boxes so your blood sugar doesn't crash at 3. He made smoothies that tasted like summer learned to read. He slipped a multivitamin into my palm each morning, a candy-colored habit that required nothing but compliance. He cleaned the bathroom like it was an argument he intended to win against mold. The house smelled like lemon and morning. Scout approved, curling around Ethan's ankles as if he were a sunbeam you could pet. When he corrected me, he bid it kindly. "Don't drink tap water," he'd say, lightly, replacing my glass with filtered. "Don't keep your phone on your nightstand. The blue light messes with you," he'd say, unplugging it and moving it to the dresser. "Don't eat late. Your sleep matters," he'd say, pulling a plate from my hand and wrapping it in beeswax, like I was a present we were saving for later. These didn't feel like rules. They felt like favors from a person who always had a better way. My mother adored him. "He's steady," she said after he spent an entire Saturday fixing the wobbly leg on her dining chair. At work, Priya, my best friend, and the acquisitions editor with the sharpest instincts I know, raised one eyebrow and said, "Steady is good," and then smiling, "Just check if Steady has a dimmer switch." I told her he did. I told her I could dim him whenever I wanted. In bed, he held me like a plan. He whispered, "I've got you," into my hair, and I let that sentence rearrange more of my life than a sentence should. He knew how to be watched. He tracked his macros and his steps and his heart rate. He tracked my water intake and how often I stretched my neck. He framed it as care, and care framed as data feels a lot like love if you've ever been told you're too sensitive for noticing what hurts. Before Ethan, I'd never had anyone tell me they wanted to keep me alive as often as he did. It just took me too long to ask why he liked saying it out loud. What if the person who keeps saying, "I've got you," is the one deciding when to let go? It started like a cold, broke the rules. On a Saturday in September, the kind of day when Austin bakes you, even in the shade, Ethan made iced tea in a tall glass pitcher and set it on the counter with a showman's flourish. "Hydration higher," he said. He slid a lemon across the cutting board, the knife clacking rhythmically, citrus oil misting the air. The kitchen smelled bright and clean, like summer refusing to stop. I poured a glass, added 2 ice cubes, and took a long drink. There was a faint metallic shadow tucked under the lemon, a background note my tongue didn't know how to name. I swallowed and frowned. "Did you use the new filter?" I asked, light, teasing. He didn't turn from the sink. "Yep. Why?" "Tastes weird." "That's because you're drinking tea, not coffee." He bumped his shoulder against mine, a friendly nudge toward, "Let it go." I did. I'm good at that. By evening, my stomach felt like it had borrowed someone else's settings and forgot to reset them. I told myself it was heat. I told myself it was fatigue. We watched a true crime documentary that tried to convince me suburbia could harbor wolves. Ethan held my feet in his lap and rubbed the arch of each with his thumb, the pressure perfect, the comfort undeniable. Sunday morning, the metallic taste revisited, stronger. I brushed my teeth twice, and the flavor clung, a coin pressed to the roof of my mouth. When I told Ethan, he held my chin lightly between his fingers and said, "You're probably fighting a virus. Rest. I'll make you a smoothie." He said smoothie, like cure. He brought it on a tray, the glass sweating through a paper napkin onto the wood. Scout sniffed it, sneezed, and stalked away with theatrical offense. Ethan grinned at the cat's disapproval and said, "Your critic has a terrible palate." I laughed and drank half. 10 minutes later, my fingers tingled and my heart skittered like a thrown stone trying to decide which part of the lake to claim. My tongue went heavy again, a dumbbell in my mouth. "Hey," Ethan said, noticing. "Sit down. Breathe. You're anxious." "About what?" I asked. The room was steady. The only variable was inside my body. He gestured gently toward the window, where the oak leaves flicked their dull green and a neighbor revved a motorcycle. "Noise. Work stress. You've been keyed up all week." He tucked a blanket around my legs, a ritual I usually loved, and went to fill my water glass. At work Monday, I Googled metallic taste causes and immediately scolded myself for doing the one thing everyone says not to do. I made an appointment with my primary care doctor, and she nodded, listened, tapped keys, ordered routine labs, and told me to hydrate and avoid spicy foods. "Sometimes a virus does this," she said. "Kind and exhausted. It passes." That afternoon, Ethan texted a link to a wellness blog about mineral deficiencies and said, "Could be something simple." He sent me a photo of my nightly vitamin pack in his palm, the capsules neat, his skin golden in the kitchen light. My phone buzzed again. "I'll take care of you." That night, he brought tea in a different mug, one of the new ones we'd bought at the East Side Market. Handmade, glazed like a storm sky. "Can't say it's not filtered," he said. He set it on the bedside table with a little bow. I sipped. Lemon, metal, and something faintly sweet that reminded me of a childhood cough syrup, placebo or memory. I coughed and swallowed again. In the quiet after midnight, with the AC planning its next exhale and the house ticking like a pot cooling on the stove, I woke up shaking. The sheet stuck to the back of my knees. The taste in my mouth was back, bright, and wrong. Ethan slept on, breathing evenly, one arm heavy across his chest like a sash. I lay there and counted my breaths, slow, steady, careful, like a woman trying not to wake whatever was already awake inside her. What do you call the moment when your body understands a story your brain refuses to read? I started writing things down. I stole a slim notebook from work, unlined, soft cover, the kind of paper that makes pens feel expensive, and I kept it in the back of the utensil drawer beneath the citrus zester and the one chopstick we'd somehow preserved from a takeout night. Every time the taste arrived, I noted the time, what I'd eaten, what I hadn't, which cup or glass I'd used, whether Ethan had handed it to me or I'd poured it myself. The entries read like weather reports in the voice of a person who doesn't trust the sky. Wednesday, 7:40 p.m. Iced tea, lemon, glass Ethan poured. Metallic, tingling, heat behind eyes. Friday, 10:25 p.m. Smoothie, strawberry banana. He poured at the counter, back turned. Mouth heavy, hands tremor. Sunday, 8:05 a.m. Coffee I poured, French press. Fine, no taste. I stopped telling Ethan every symptom, because saying it out loud turned my fear into a project he could manage, and he was so good at managing me that sometimes I forgot to ask whether that's what I wanted. When I made my own drinks, the taste visited less. When he handed me something, it visited more, which could have meant anything, including the fact that my nerves were running their own universe of experiments without me. Still, data is a comfort if you're the sort of person who alphabetizes your spices because it makes you feel like you live inside a sentence that knows how to end. At Priya's desk, I said, "I feel weird," and she looked at me with her eyes first and her mouth second. "Weird like?" she asked. I told her about the taste, the numbness, the way my heart sometimes forgot choreography and improvised a solo. I did not tell her about the notebook. I did not tell her that the variables correlated with Ethan's generosity. She said could be stress because we all say could be stress the way we say could be rain when the clouds behave. Could be something else.
She reached into her drawer and handed me a candy from a jar that magically replenished itself. She said, "Go see your doctor again and drink water you poured with your own hands." Her gaze snagged on that last sentence, as if it had surprised her by showing up. That night, I rinsed my usual blue glass and set it upside down on the drawing rack. I took a different glass from the back of the cabinet, a chipped one we never used, and poured my own water. I drank half in the kitchen. No taste. I carried it to the bedroom and put it on my nightstand. When I came back from brushing my teeth, Ethan had swapped it for the new market mug, steam curling softly like a promise. Herbal, sleep well tea. "I'm good," I said too quickly. I picked up the mug anyway because saying no to kindness makes women feel rude. Scout jumped onto the bed, flicked her tail, and made a slow inspection of the bedside table with the seriousness all cats bring to bureaucratic tasks. She leaned toward the mug, sniffed, and stepped back. Ethan laughed. "Critic strikes again." I didn't drink it. I waited until he slept, the room's darkness settling like a good coat, and then I carried the mug to the sink and poured it out. The tea streamed into the drain, steam and scent climbing into my face. I rinsed the mug, then washed it thoroughly, because if you're going to lie, it's better to do it with soap. The next evening, I arrived home to find a new water filter on the counter, still in the box like a gift posed for an Instagram caption. Ethan walked in behind me, carrying groceries, and kissed the back of my head. "See? I listen." "Thank you," I said. Gratitude can coexist with fear. It shouldn't have to. In the pantry, a small thing rearranged itself. The vitamin bottles, white plastic with cheerful fonts, had been grouped into a new formation, labels facing forward like a choir. A new amber glass bottle sat among them, unlabeled, out of place. I reached for it, casual, and Ethan's hand landed on mine, gentle but firm. "Careful," he said. "That one's messy. Powder gets everywhere." "What is it?" I asked. The question tasted neutral to my tongue, but not to my nerves. He said samples. A vendor gave me a few to test out. He plucked the bottle from my fingers and moved it to a higher shelf, like we were child-proofing for a kid we didn't have. He made me dinner, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, a salad that sounded expensive when I chewed. He poured me water. He watched me drink with the soft satisfaction of a person who had completed a task. I slept badly. At 2:17 a.m., I got up and padded into the kitchen, the tile cool and smooth under my feet. I opened the pantry and stared at the shelf where the amber bottle had sat. It was gone. The absence itself proof of presence. In the silence, my own breathing sounded like a stranger trying to tiptoe. The next morning, Ethan kissed me on the forehead and handed me a lunch container, quinoa, roasted sweet potatoes, a little ramekin of sauce labeled "for you" with a smiley face. His penmanship is very neat. In the afternoon, my doctor called. Lab's normal. She said, "Hydrate, avoid alcohol, you're healthy." I thanked her and wrote "healthy" in my notebook like an accusation I couldn't yet prove wrong. When I got home, my mother was on the porch with peach muffins and a story about a neighbor's grandson. "You look thin," she said, which is a compliment in a language I no longer speak. Ethan came home 10 minutes later, took the muffins, cut one in half, warmed it, and brought it to me with a little pat of butter, like a peace offering between two nations. I bit into it. It tasted like peaches and summer and trust. At midnight, I woke with the taste of metal in my mouth. If I was inventing this, why did my body repeat itself so precisely? I didn't own a security camera because I didn't think of my life as a thing that required surveillance. Priya did, in the way women who live alone learn to narrate their own safety out loud. She had a tiny cube camera in her entryway, an inconspicuous eye with an app. On a Wednesday after work, when the office air smelled like copier toner and someone's reheated fish, I told her about the amber bottle. I told her about the taste, the aches, the way Ethan's kindness now sounded to me like a lullaby with a wrong note.
"Borrow mine," she said, without making a face. She wrapped the camera in a scarf like a secret and slipped it into my tote bag, as if we were exchanging contraband and not the ability to sleep better. I tucked the camera behind our fruit bowl, angled it at the kitchen sink, the counter, and the stove. I told myself I was doing it to rule out my own paranoia, to give myself a video I could study and then use to apologize to the air for suspecting someone I loved. I did not tell Ethan about the camera. Hiding it from a man who cataloged my hydration felt like vandalizing a church, but I did it anyway. Friday at 6:12 p.m., Ethan came home sweaty from the gym and kissed the top of my head, salt and eucalyptus blooming from his skin. "Long day?" he asked. "You look fried." "Deadlines," I said, which is what I always say when I don't want to elaborate on the feeling of being human. He chopped vegetables with efficiency and made me a lemon spritzer in the storm glaze mug. "Special," he said, winking. I carried the drink to the living room. Scout jumped onto the arm of the sofa and put one paw on my shoulder like she was swearing me in. When he went to shower, I slipped into the kitchen, tipped the spritzer into the sink, and rinsed the mug. I filled it with fresh water and drank from it just to prove I wasn't ridiculous. I put the mug back on the coaster. The house smelled like rosemary and lemon and something I didn't have a word for. The next morning, while Ethan ran on the trail and I pretended to like yoga, I reviewed the footage on my laptop at the dining table. The video was unremarkable for the first 10 minutes. Me moving around, Ethan moving around, the choreography of a domestic evening. I sped it up. At 6:32, Ethan turned from the putting board, took the storm glaze mug in his left hand, and set it by the sink. He reached up, opened the highest pantry shelf with his right hand, and without looking, brought down a small amber bottle. He unscrewed it, quick, practiced, and moved his body to block the camera's view with his shoulder. When he stepped away again, he was stirring the drink with a spoon, and then he tapped the spoon twice on the rim, a little ritual like punctuation, and brought the mug to me. I watched it twice. 3 times. On the third, I had to stop because my eyes were watering with a heat that made the screen blur. The video had no sound, but I could hear the spoon against ceramic anyway, the tap-tap that felt like a knock. I copied the file to a new folder on a USB drive, a cheap plastic kind I'd used at conferences and then forgotten. I labeled it Papers for H&R because rumor says people overlook the boring. I slid it into the pocket of a blazer at the back of my closet. I deleted the footage from the camera app and from my laptop's trash folder. I took a second USB from a drawer, copied the file to that one too, and zipped it into a pouch I kept in my work tote under a stack of style guides. I could feel my heartbeat in my wrists, the private metronome roaring. When Ethan returned, pink and breathless, he kissed me and said, "Yoga glow." He pressed a cold bottle of water to my cheek and I flinched. "Hey, you're jumpy," he said, immediate concerned. "I didn't sleep well," I said, which was true if you counted every night since I met him as one long, strange night. At brunch on Sunday, we met friends at a place with concrete floors and plants hanging in macrame like gentle stalactites. Ethan told a story about a client who only wanted to talk about his fantasy football picks while doing squats. Everyone laughed. When I excused myself to the bathroom, Leela, one of our mutuals, caught my arm lightly and said, "You okay? Ethan says you've been having panic attacks." The room narrowed, then widened. "Does he?" I said, careful to layer lightness over the words like frosting over something cracked. "He's worried," she said. "You're lucky." Lucky. I washed my hands in water so hot it made the skin on my knuckles pink and stood there until I felt the impulse to be polite, soften, and drop. I looked at myself in the warped metal of the paper towel dispenser and thought, if I say it out loud, what proof do I become? What do you do with a truth that fits perfectly in a video and still won't fit in the space between two people at brunch? I took the video to the police.
The detective at the downtown station wore a suit that had told too many stories and a tie that didn't strictly match. The room smelled like coffee and copier heat, a bouquet of bureaucracy. I placed the USB on the table between us as if it were a fragile egg. He watched me like he had learned not to interrupt. "This is my husband," I said, and the word husband tasted like someone else's food. I think, I swallowed hard, I think he's putting something in my drinks. He nodded, unsnapped a cheap pen, and wrote the date on a blank form. "Tell me everything." I told him about the taste, about the timing, about the amber bottle, about the video. I described the spoon tapping the rim, the angle of Ethan's body when he blocked the view, the casual choreography of the little lie he had given his hands to do. My voice shook once and then again and then smoothed out because you can't keep asking your heart to narrate and expect it not to get tired. He plugged in the USB. We watched the footage together. The detective leaned forward, squinted, rewound, played again. Tap, tap. He sat back and exhaled. "That's concerning," he said, his voice careful to stay on the safe side of a line. "But what you have here is circumstantial. We don't see what, if anything, was added. We don't know the substance." He tapped his pen twice on the table, not rhythmically, just thinking. "Do you have any," he hesitated, "medical evidence?" "My labs are clean," I said, and the word clean felt like a betrayal. "But I stopped. Every woman in America knows how I feel sounds when you say it to a man paid to deal in facts." He was kind. He was not enough. "Without a toxicology result, this will be difficult to pursue," he said. "I can refer you to a protective order advocate if you feel unsafe at home." I left with a brochure in my pocket I didn't know what to do with. In the parking lot, heat slapped me in the face like a wet towel. I sat in my car and put my head on the steering wheel and let the air conditioning shout at me until my eyes stopped burning. I texted Priya. They need a lab. They need what I can't get without asking the person I'm afraid of to help me get it. She replied immediately, "Come to my place tonight. We'll think." At home, Ethan had cleaned the kitchen so thoroughly the counters felt hostile. He kissed me and asked about my day, and I said, "Deadlines." And he said, "You need better boundaries." And I almost laughed because, yes, I did. I started cooking for myself in small ways that looked like moods. I want cereal. I want toast. I am in a popcorn place. He tolerated it, then teased me, then finally said, mildly, "You're not getting enough protein." He put a container of something on the counter and said, "Use this." I said, "Later," and moved it to the back of the cabinet when he went to the bathroom. I hid a second camera in the living room, angled low at the bar cart. Purposely, I left a note on the cart with my handwriting on it. "Doctor says no alcohol this week." I wanted to know if he only aimed at tea and smoothies or if restraint would irritate him into improvising. 3 days later, on the footage, I watched him pick up the note, read it, smile a small private smile, and then replace it exactly. He didn't touch the bottles. He had patience. Predators who prefer time are the worst kind because they know how to look reasonable while they measure you. I stopped getting sick as often. My body rewarded me for my paranoia. The taste still arrived, sometimes, like a ghost who hadn't gotten the memo, but the nights of shaking lengthened into hours of alertness. When Ethan offered me anything, I thanked him and set it aside later, a word I used as a talisman. Later filled our sink with half-drunk kindness. He noticed. The notice tightened his mouth in small, easily denied ways. He started telling people I was struggling. At dinner with his sister, he said, "Claire's been in her head, like my mind was a closet I refused to clean." He told my mother I was burnt out. He told Leela I was distant and forgetting to eat. He told Priya I was dizzy a lot lately, which is a thing he knew because he was handing me the dizziness. The narrative wrapped me up and carried me across rooms before I noticed. By the time I said, "Actually," I sounded like I was interrupting a conversation he had already prepared everyone to have. I took Scout to the vet for a dental cleaning, and afterward she was groggy and sweet, her breath awful.
her whiskers vibrating when she purred. Ethan threw away the leftover pain medication the vet had given me because he said it's stupid to keep this around. People are reckless. He said people like a group he had studied in a lab. One evening, when I came home from work, the house smelled like bleach and oranges again, stronger, as if the kitchen had hosted an argument and lost. A new lockbox sat by the back door, small and gray, the kind realtors use. "Spare key," Ethan said when I asked. "You keep losing yours." I hadn't lost mine. He showed me the code and laughed when I wrinkled my nose. "It's our anniversary date," he said. "I want you to remember it." He kissed me, and the mint on his breath felt like an apology I didn't ask for. Priya pressed the lab angle. She said, "Find a way to get a sealed sample. Not just video, something you didn't touch." Her voice did not blink when I said the words, "I'm scared." She said, "Good. Fear is information. Use it." So, I ordered a set of sterile sample bottles. Not for anything illegal, just the kind you buy for spice mixes when you fancy yourself a person who makes gifts. And I labeled 3 of them in my smallest handwriting with Monday's date. When Ethan left a mug on my nightstand and went to brush his teeth, I poured it carefully into one of the bottles, capped it, and slid it under the bed into a shoebox I'd cleared. When he came back, I lifted the empty mug and said, "Thanks." It felt like telling a lie that wanted to protect me. I took that bottle to an independent lab the next day on my lunch break. The waiting room smelled like boredom and sanitizer. The receptionist didn't blink at my request for a general screen. She said, "Results in a few days." Her nails were a clean, milky pink I suddenly envied for its simplicity. On the 3rd day, the lab emailed me. Inconclusive. The report used the word trace once and then got shy. I read it 3 times, looking for sentences that wanted to be heroes. None did. That night, Ethan set a cup of chamomile by my elbow and said, "You've been busy," like the word was both compliment and accusation. He brushed my shoulder with his fingers. "You know, I only want you healthy." I know. I didn't. At 2:51 a.m., my phone buzzed. A number I didn't know had sent a single message. "Check your insurance." I sat up, the room blurry with sleep and anger. The clock's red digits painted the ceiling. Ethan snored the steady, performative snore of someone who wants to be accused of nothing. In the morning, I logged into the employee portal for my benefits and found a policy I remember signing during onboarding, the sort of paperwork you complete while thinking about lunch. There was a new rider. It had been added 2 months ago. The beneficiary name was Ethan's, which was not a surprise. The added amount was. I closed my laptop carefully and set my pawns flat on the table because my hands needed a job that didn't involve breaking anything. The kitchen smelled like coffee and cinnamon and the slightly sour note a dishcloth develops when it's been loyal too long. Ethan walked in and kissed my head. "Pancakes," he asked cheerfully and crisp. "You deserve pancakes." What does a person deserve, exactly, when the word deserve has been living in the wrong mouth? I decided to be polite and dangerous at the same time. At lunch with Priya, I said the sentence I'd been avoiding. I'm going to pretend to trust him so I can prove I can't. The faux place smelled like basil and anise and steam, and the table had a wobble that made our soups ripple whenever someone laughed in the next booth. Priya didn't flinch. "Then decide your rules," she said. "Rules you won't break even if he is kind, especially if he is kind." So I wrote them. In my notebook, I made a list, crisp handwriting like a contract. Accept nothing I didn't open myself. Eat what I cooked or what came sealed from a place with a receipt. Keep the cameras rolling. Move them. Tell one more person the whole truth. Gather proof that doesn't require anyone to believe my adjectives. I chose the person carefully. Not my mother. Her love would drown both of us. Not Lila. She'd already been recruited. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, the retired librarian who wore red lipstick to water her azaleas and measured people by whether they returned her Tupperware. I told her most of it.
She listened, then said, "We'll call this a reading project." She pressed a spare key into my hand and said, "If you need somewhere to be, I will make you tea. You will watch me make it." At home, I performed trust. I let Ethan hand me a smoothie and then forgot it in the fridge. I let him pour me tea and then set it down to answer the door and poured it into a plant I was perfectly okay with sacrificing to science. I let him tuck me in, and I let Scout tuck her face into the bend of my knees, and I let my phone record 3-hour videos of nothing happening. I also went to a lawyer. The office smelled like paper, and the soap in the bathroom was fancy enough to feel like a compliment. I asked about protective orders and about my rights to the house. I asked about what evidence mattered and what evidence made people tilt their heads and say words like hearsay and domestic. The lawyer, a woman whose eyes looked like they had read too many depositions and still believed in nouns, gave me a list. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't confront him until you can do it somewhere he can't control. I walked out with a folder I didn't want and a steady ache in my left shoulder like my body was storing information and didn't know where to file it. That night, I let Ethan hold me. He breathed against my neck and said, "You've been so calm lately." And I said, "I'm trying." And he said, "Good girl," which is a thing no one gets to say to me. He squeezed my hip with his hand like a man testing a melon. I stared at the shadow on the ceiling that the streetlight made through our blinds and thought, I am building a door. When it opens, he won't be the one walking through. How much of yourself do you have to pretend not to be in order to stay alive long enough to prove you are?
2 days later, I came home to find my laptop open on the dining table, a half-written document on the screen. Ethan doesn't use my computer. He has his own, all sleek, all locked behind a Face ID that smiles for him like a mirror that likes its job. The document was titled Letter. The first line read, "I've been struggling more than I've admitted." My chest pulled in on itself like it was trying to become a fist. I scrolled. The letter was a neat paragraph of plausible sadness, the kind of language people want from a woman who hasn't been sleeping. It was not my voice. It was also not my voice, which is a special kind of theft. The date at the top was next week's. "Hey," Ethan said from the kitchen, casual, as if he were giving me an object lesson in gaslighting with props. He slid a pan onto the stove, the burner clicking until the blue ring caught. "I thought we could try that sheet pan dinner tonight." "What's this?" I asked, my hand on the trackpad. Friendly. He walked over, towel over his shoulder, and looked at the screen for exactly 1 second. "Oh," he said lightly, "I jot things sometimes." He shrugged. "Prompts for when I coach clients. Thought I'd try writing what I want them to say to themselves." "To themselves?" I repeated. My mouth felt dry. The room smelled like lemon cleaner again, sharp and bright and suddenly nauseating. He smiled and closed the laptop with 2 fingers, the gesture clean enough to be considered hygienic. He said, "Don't work late tonight. You're better when you sleep." Later, while he took out the trash, I opened the laptop again, copied the document to my USB, and emailed it to myself at an account Ethan didn't know about, one I had made in college to send myself quotes I was too embarrassed to post. The subject line I used was, "Plums, because you can hide a lot in a poem." The next day, my boss called me into her office. "Ethan dropped by," she said, as if that were a normal sentence. I stared at her framed photo of a beach on her bookshelf, an ocean pretending to be restful. She smiled like kindness was contagious. "Do you need anything?" I kept my voice steady and small. "Just deadlines," I said, and then apologized to the air for making the room awkward. After work, I went to Mrs. Alvarez's to pick up a bundt cake she'd claimed she had made too much of. Her house smelled like vanilla and old books. She came by my porch, too, she said without preamble, cutting the cake with a slow precision of a surgeon who believes in generosity. She brought me a little bottle of those calm drops everyone recommends, said they might help if I get worked up. Did you take them? I asked. She lifted an eyebrow that had no patience for condescension. I'm 81, not newly hatched, she said. I watered the azaleas with them. She slipped a cake into a tin and put it in my hands. She said, you keep your head and your evidence. On Friday night, Ethan suggested a date. That sushi place you like. He dressed in a soft gray shirt that made him look like a gentle decision. He ordered for me, which he does because he loves me. And when the server took our menus, he reached across and squeezed my hand. You seem better, he said, a small smile touching his mouth. I like you calm. I excused myself to the bathroom and texted the detective with the tie that didn't match. I have a video. I have a letter. I also think he's laying groundwork to claim I'm unstable. What next? I didn't expect an answer. He replied in 3 minutes. Bring what you have tomorrow. 10 a.m., bring someone with you. When I returned to the table, Ethan said, everything okay? His eyes were soft, his hands folded neatly by his water glass, his posture a seminar in what women are told to want. Everything's fine, I said. It was not. Back at home, while he was in the shower, I plugged the second camera into a new outlet. I angled it at the counter again, lower this time, less obstructed. I left the storm-glazed mug by the sink like a stage prop. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the water beating on tile and pictured our house as a diorama in a museum, the kind where people press buttons to light up certain parts, and wondered which switch I'd already pressed and which was about to flip without me. The next morning, I left early under the pretense of a work meeting and took my folder to the station. I brought Priya. The detective watched the new video, Ethan in profile, moving quick and tidy, the amber bottle in his hand for half a second before he blocked the view. He watched the clip of my laptop screen with the letter. He took notes in handwriting that belonged to a man who prints in all caps because someone yelled at him once for clarity. He said, we need a controlled situation, something with a third party, a place he can't argue about later. You want me to invite him to poison me while you watch? I asked. My mouth tasted like paper. He said, I want you safe, and I want jurisdiction. We will not ask you to ingest anything, but if he attempts to tamper with a beverage in a monitored setting, he spread his hands, it's evidence. I walked out into a bright morning that smelled like exhaust and breakfast tacos and felt like a conspiracy between the sun and my skin. Priya squeezed my shoulder. I'll be there, she said, and I nodded because the only thing that felt possible was agreement. That afternoon, back at home, I found the storm-glazed mug washed and drying on the rack, spotless, turned upside down like a turtle that had gotten the better end of a moral. Ethan stood at the counter, whistling a song from the radio. He handed me a grocery list he'd drafted, bananas, spinach, lemons, almond milk, and said, we're running low. The word we sounded like a claim and a threat. When I reached for Matisse, I noticed the lockbox code had been changed. New anniversary, I joked. He smiled in a way that didn't include his eyes. He said, just tightening up. You never can be too careful. How careful is careful exactly when the person holding the padlock is the one you're trying to get away from?
We chose a clinic that ran community health fairs on Saturdays. Priya knew the coordinator from a book event we'd done about food deserts. Austin is small when you do things on purpose. The plan was simple and full of rules I repeated to myself like psalms. I would not drink anything Ethan touched. The clinic would set out 3 identical cups on a table in a private consultation room with a camera in the corner, the kind installed to protect staff. The detective, tie mercifully matching that day, would wait in a nearby office with a nurse. Priya would sit with me, her presence out loud. Ethan would think we were there for a nutrition consult and a hydration challenge he'd set up through his corporate connections. I'm proud of you,
he said in the car, squeezing my knee as if we were on our way to adopt a puppy. The AC roared. The day already smelled like hot asphalt and optimism. He wore that soft gray shirt again. I wore a sweater, even though it didn't make sense because sometimes armor is made of fabric and poor choices. We checked in. The receptionist gave us visitors' badges that stuck to our shirts and printed our names as if they were facts. A volunteer led us down a hallway that smelled like lemon and hand gel. The room had a table, 4 chairs, and a small sink. A camera domed in the corner ceiling like a polite eye. "Hydration challenge," the volunteer said, cheerful. "We're going to compare filtered and bottled water." She set 3 paper cups on the table and labeled the underside of each with a number I couldn't see. "We'll step out. Take your time." Priya took a seat by the door and crossed her legs in the universal language of, "I am not moving." She took out her phone and pretended to scroll. My heart hammered, and I reminded it that noise does not necessarily equal danger. Ethan rolled his shoulders like a runner at a start line. "Okay, babe, let's make this fun." He lifted cup 1, sniffed it, and made a face like a teacher grading an effort that tried. "Smells like a pool," he said. He set it down. He lifted cup 2, swirled it like wine, sniffed, nodded, sipped. "Better." He pushed it toward me. "Try." I didn't move. I said, "You go first." Keeping my voice steady and warm, a song for a cat you need to coax out from under a bed. Ethan smiled. "We're not 5, he said, laughing. "Just taste." He pushed cup 3 toward me and turned his body in that way I now recognized. Casual, blocking the camera's line for a second. My stomach clenched, rage and fear in equal measure. Priya didn't breathe. I took cup 1, lifted it to my lips, and pretended to sip. I set it down. I took cup 2 and did the same. I did not touch cup 3. A gentle knock on the door. The detective stepped in with the nurse, both casual in that way people are casual when they have rehearsed a certain kind of disaster. He asked, "Everything okay in here?" Ethan blinked, surprised, then smiled quick. "Great," he said. "Just doing a thing for," he gestured vaguely toward the building, "wellness." The nurse smiled back. "Mind if we swap cups?" she asked. "We're tracking a batch number." Ethan's gaze flicked to her name badge and then to me. He played confusion. Sure." He stepped back enough to let her reach, but not enough to feel like someone not guarding anything. The nurse picked up cup 3 and placed it on a tray with a lid. The detective nodded, like a man who finally heard a melody resolve. "Thanks," he said. "Appreciate your help." After they left, Ethan laughed. "Bureaucracy," he said. He put a hand on the back of my neck and squeezed, not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to remind me that hands are tools and can be used for anything. We walked to the car. The sky had gone to white, the kind of Texas noon that makes colors give up. He unlocked the doors, and I slid into the passenger seat. He put his hand on the wheel, tapped a rhythm, and said, "You were good in there. Calm." My phone buzzed. A text from the detective. "Do not go home with him. A second later. Come back. Now." My hand didn't shake when I wrote back. "On our way." I turned to Ethan and tried on a face I didn't know I had. "I left my sunglasses. Stupid. I'm gonna run back in. I'll circle. Text me." I got out of the car and walked fast back toward the glass doors. The lobby's AC hit me like an argument I wanted to lose. The detective was waiting by the reception desk, a smile arranged on his face that looked like service but felt like a net. "Ms. Hart," he said, formal in that way the room changed shape. "We need to talk." What happens to a story when the room itself believes you? They found enough. I was not in the room when they told him. I was in a different office with Priya, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of water I poured myself. The nurse from the hallway sat with us and asked me about my cat's name like it was the most important thing on the list. Somewhere else in the building, a conversation took the shape of a man learning that his choreography had been recorded and that the audience was not who he thought. The detective came in and closed the door gently. "There were measurable substances in that cup," he said, careful and quiet. He did not name them. I did not ask. "We have your videos. We have the letter draft." He paused. "We have enough to move forward." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. The breath was shaky, the way breaths are when they've been folded and stored too long. Priya squeezed my hand. I smelled lemon from the wipes the nurse had used on the table and the faint, clean cotton of Priya's shirt. They placed Ethan under arrest in the parking lot. The words "under arrest" sit heavily in a mouth if you are not the sort of person used to saying them. Later, a lawyer would call what he did tampering, assault, and a word that means what he was adding mattered more than his smile. The charges would shape themselves into columns and sections and sentences that wanted to grow teeth. I went home with a patrol car idling half a block down, their presence an honest kind of theater. Mrs. Alvarez stood on her porch, her red lipstick perfect as ever. "You come have tea," she said. "We'll both watch." I did. We did. The tea tasted like tea. In the weeks that followed, apologies arrived in careful envelopes and awkward texts. Leela cried on my sofa and said she felt stupid. My boss took me to lunch and said the word sorry too much, and then correctly. My mother scrubbed my stove in penance for believing any part of a narrative that made me the problem. Ethan's sister sent a single-line email. I didn't want to see it. I didn't reply. Some sentences are complete without your signature. I talked to a therapist who didn't say, "Why did you stay?" She said, "How did you know?" And I told her about taste and timing and the way my cat sneezed at a drink and how routines can be kindness until they become cages. I told her about the video and the spoon and the letter on my laptop. I told her about lemon and mint and bleach and oranges and how smells can become sirens if you teach your brain to listen. I changed the locks, even though he wouldn't be coming back. I replaced the storm glaze mug with one I bought with Priya, blue and ridiculous, splattered like a child's painting. I put the cameras away and then took them back out again, and then away, the way you do with things you're not sure you want to own, even if they saved you. Some nights, I still wake at 3:26. I go to the kitchen and pour water from the tap and drink it by the sink, lights off, the house quiet. The water tastes like water. The fan in the bedroom hums when I return, a soft, steadying loop that now sounds like a yes. People believe performers. It's efficient. But so is listening to your body whisper no in the middle of an otherwise convincing scene. When the court date came, the courtroom smelled like old wood and rules. Ethan didn't meet my eyes. I read a statement that started with, "This is what happened to me," not "this is how it felt," though I could have written a book about that too. The judge listened. The room didn't flinch. And when I stepped out into the bright afternoon afterward, the whole block felt taller, like architecture that had finally decided to be useful. I keep thinking about instructions. I used to believe a safe life was a checklist. Drink water, get sleep, marry a man who says goodnight. But checklists are only as good as the person holding the pen. Ethan loved instructions. He loved rules you could hang on the wall and point to when someone asked for context. He loved being the person who knew what time you should take your vitamin and what time you should stop looking at screens and what temperature your room should be so that your rest performed properly. He loved being needed in ways that made applause seem like healthcare. I still like tidy margins. I still alphabetize my spices. But now my instructions live inside my body, and my body writes them in a language that is not up for debate. The first is, if your mouth tastes wrong, believe your mouth. The second, if kindness makes you smaller, It is not kindness. The third, start recording when the narrative shifts and you can't explain why. And the fourth, tell one person the whole thing without apologizing for your adjectives. When people say, I would have known, I don't correct them. Maybe they would have. Maybe they wouldn't. We're all so good at believing the version of a story that lets us go back to sleep. I don't go back to sleep easily anymore. That's not the tragedy I thought it would be. It's a new kind of waking. When I pour myself a glass of water now, I say out loud, I did this. It sounds small. It isn't. I used to think safety came from who stood beside me. Now I know it starts with who I listen to when the room goes quiet, and that voice, finally, is mine.